Hello and welcome to the Engineering Career Coach Podcast. In this episode, I'll be talking to Freund, the co-founder and CEO of Wilco, a startup dedicated to empowering developers to unlock their full potential. We'll be talking about why imposter syndrome affects so many engineers and how they can overcome it. I'm your host, Jeff Perry, founder of More Than Engineering and creator of the Engineering Career Accelerator program, helping engineers and technology professionals with leadership and career coaching to create meaningful careers and lives. And this is the Engineering Career Coach Podcast, brought to you by EMI, the first podcast dedicated to helping engineers and technical professionals with both their personal and professional development. Now it's time to jump right into the main segment of our episode. Today, I have the pleasure to speak with Freund, the co-founder and CEO of Wilco. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Glad to be here.
Now, so glad to have you here. Can you tell us a little bit about you and what you're up to on a daily basis? Maybe share a little bit of background on what Wilco is and some of the things you and the team are up to these days.
Sure. So I've been a software engineer or in engineering management for the better part of my career. Started writing my first computer program when I was, I think 7 or 8, something like that, in BASIC of all languages. Yeah, that was fun. But have been professionally writing software since about 2005. Initially at a big company, but very quickly got to the startup world, where I've been a software engineer and eventually managing software teams for quite a while. Most notably VP of engineering at Handy and then at WeWork. And now the co-founder of Wilco, where we're kind of like a flight simulator, but for software engineers instead of pilots. So, engineers need a place to practice. They need to hone their skills. And to do that, you need a safe environment that constantly challenges you instead of learning on the job, which could be slow and inefficient and error prone.
Yeah. So how is it different? I mean, there's all sorts of places out there to learn development tools and stuff like that and courses and things. How is the Wilco experience different from some of the others that are out there right now?
So the key word that you said was learn. And we want you to practice, not just learn. So there's a difference between understanding the theory, knowing how to write code, and actually being a software engineer in a team working on a production system. And that's what we're trying to help you with, not the stuff that you learn in college, but the day-to-day things like, what are the security implications of what I'm doing? Is what I'm doing right now affecting performance? How do I communicate with my team members? How do I ensure that lessons are learned and implemented when something goes wrong? It's really a combination of soft and hard skills that have to do with so many things other than just writing code.
Okay, excellent. And that leads us into some of the things I think we're going to talk a lot about today in terms of the soft skills and working with people and things. Especially in the technology world, there are a lot of people coming into tech and software and engineering from different backgrounds because of all the growth and opportunities that are there. But what that means is sometimes they can deal with this feeling of what we'd often call imposter syndrome. So talk to me about your thoughts on imposter syndrome. How can someone kind of identify if they're dealing with it, and maybe just say, what is it?
Sure. So, maybe we'll start with a preface and a disclaimer and say that imposter syndrome is not a personality disorder.
Yes.
It is a syndrome, it is a phenomenon, but it's not a disorder. However, if you do feel like you need help, then, we're not experts. I'm definitely not an expert. Please, talk to someone professional. But in the colloquial sense, we see imposter syndrome all around us all the time as software engineers. And one of the ways I like to think about it is imposter syndrome is when there is a gap between your ability to close a gap and where you are today. What do I mean by that? So let's say you don't know something or your skills are lacking. There's something you need to work on, but you don't trust your ability to close that gap, that's what I call imposter syndrome. You look around you, you think, oh, these people were able to pick up on that skill. They were able to learn it, but I'm not as good as them. That's the easiest definition of imposter syndrome.
Yeah. So give me an example of like one of these gaps that someone might have a hard time closing.
Yeah. So, let's say you joined the team, and this happened to me on my first job. I'm fresh out of college. I know how to write code. That's what I learned in college, right? And give me a function, I'll write the hell out of it, right? But guess what? When you join a team, there is no function that you need to write. So the first day at the company was just general employee orientation. That's easy. The second day, the team takes, or the second half, sorry, the team takes me out to lunch. And then, they start talking shop, and I realize, wait, I have no idea what they're talking about. Like, what does a production code base even look like? I've never seen one. Like, all I did was write functions in college. What is a code base, and how do we divide the responsibility among the team? How do I even set my computer up so that I can work on everything I'm supposed to work? I don't know any of this. Am I like, what am I doing here? Is this too early? Maybe I should go back to college and learn some more until I get back here. And, that was like during lunch, that was the only thing I can think of. And people who know me know that I'm generally a very confident person. But in the back of my head, I'm running these scenarios. I'm like, I'm going to get fired probably after today when they realize that I don't really belong here and I don't know what to do. And, then I try to sort of compose myself and think, wait, but everyone around me was in the same situation, right? They also came after theoretical training. They were also in the same state probably of trying to figure out what's happening here and how do they apply everything that they've learned in real life.
Right.
And that's when, I started to relax and get into motion. And I think that is the gap that I'm talking about. When you get to a point where you don't trust your ability to be at the next level, or you don't trust your talents to fit in.
Yeah, it's tough. And so I sometimes think about imposter syndrome. It's almost like that feeling like you don't belong. It's almost like you're there and you're like, I'm here, but should I be here? It's like this fear that almost someone's going to come up with behind you with a clipboard, and I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. Like, I think we made a mistake here, right? Like, there's this constant fear that that's going to happen. But why do you think this is so common? Like, because I would say that in many respects, all of us deal with this idea of imposter syndrome to some degree at some point, and usually multiple points along our lives and our careers. Why do you think this is so common for engineers to deal with?
I think, surrounding yourself with very intelligent people can obviously, make you question yourself, right? Everyone around me is so intelligent. Maybe I don't belong here. And you don't actually see that other people are battling the same thing as you, right? You don't see how they got to where they are. You look at someone that you admire and, oh my God, they do such a great job. And you know what? Maybe you even wrote a piece of code and they're reviewing it. Those people who you look up to are reviewing your code and you're like, oh my God, like, what are they going to say? That's a situation that's bound to, like, code reviews, I think, are designed to cause imposter syndrome at people. And it doesn't matter, how much experience you have. Let's say you have 20 years of experience, but you just joined a team, and someone who's been on that team for even just a year, and maybe that's the entire experience they have, they're bound to find something in your code that is not right. And guess what? They're going to point it out. And if they're good teammates, they're good colleagues, they're pointing out in a very supportive way, and they're trying to make it constructive. But, let's face it, not all colleagues are ideal. And there's a chance that they're also calling it out in a very non-polite way, I'll say. And if you're in that situation and you don't have imposter syndrome, I would say, power to you, but you must have some special blood flowing in your veins.
Yeah. I mean, some of these different experiences we go into that are new and uncertain, and we're having to learn a bunch of new things or surrounded by smart people. A lot of times we think of imposter syndrome as really kind of activating or making us more aware of these insecurities that we have, right? But maybe imposter syndrome is more than just insecurity. Like why do these feelings come from? It's more than just insecurities, but maybe it's something else too.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that, insecurities obviously seems very correlated, but you can look at someone who's very confident and not know that they're going through imposter syndrome. And it's not necessarily because they're insecure, it's because maybe they just got a data point that caused them to question themselves momentarily. You know, I know some people who, when they get imposter syndrome, could be in that feeling for a few hours or even a few days. And I know people who get imposter syndrome more frequently, but it only lasts a minute.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my God, someone, like you said, someone's going to come here with a clipboard and say, I don't belong here. But then a minute later, you know what? Actually, I got this. I think I'm okay. This actually happened to me in a test in college. There was something in one of the classes, one of the courses, the professor taught us something for 5 minutes the entire semester. No one thought this thing is going to be on the test. And guess what? That was one of the biggest questions.
Oh, wow.
And, I go into that and I start to think, oh my God, this is like, I'm gonna flunk this test. This is awful. This is bad. I don't know how to answer this. I don't belong here. And 2 minutes later, I'm like, wait, everyone learned this topic for the sum of 5 minutes throughout the entire semester, right? I'm not the only person dealing with this. And all of a sudden I started feeling better. And guess what? After 5 minutes, the professor comes in and says, for those of you who don't remember this and that and the other, and that actually made the question pretty trivial. So this thing happens to software engineers all the time. They look at something and they think to themselves, oh my God, how can I even do this? Or I look at something that someone else wrote and they're so much better than me. And then maybe you start breaking it apart and you say, well, this part is actually something I can comprehend. And then you break it apart a bit further and you say to yourself, well, if I look at these two things together, now I'm actually making sense of it. And I think I would have done the same thing. And, after a few of those iterations, you start thinking to yourself, you know what, I can do this. This could have been something I wrote. And, I think that if you, the better you are at reassuring yourself that the syndrome will pass, the faster it will pass, right? This is kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I always try to come up with some external validation that what I'm feeling now is not because of something I did or something I'm not good at, but something that's objectively challenging.
Yeah, and so you're starting to talk about some of these ways to kind of deal with this because you mentioned like your example when you're in a test and plenty of other situations that we deal with, right? Sometimes this imposter syndrome, these feelings of self-doubt can leave us almost paralyzed, right? But breaking it down or finding some other source of validation or for a little bit, it was like recognizing to some degree that you're not the only one who's dealing with this, right? And maybe not in a test situation that you can actually talk to other people about that, but in plenty of other situations, we just like open our mouths and express, "Hey, I'm struggling with this." You're probably not the only one who's dealing with it now, or at least has dealt with it. So these are some other ideas. But I'm curious, do you have other ideas or habits or actions that engineers can use when they're in that space to kind of get from I'm self-doubting and I'm having a hard time kind of moving through this, maybe getting a little bit paralyzed to, breaking free and really making progress through it?
Yeah. So first of all, I think what you said about communicating with other team members is spot on because, I can't count how many times I've dealt with something that I wasn't sure about. And then I reach out to someone else and they're like, yeah, of course, I was in the exact same situation a week ago or 2 months ago, or
Right.
when we first set up this on-call structure, none of us knew what we were doing. There's so many different scenarios for that. So definitely talk to other team members, especially the supportive ones. I'm sure you'll find that all of us are struggling with the same thing. So that's one thing you should do. The other is, like I said earlier, break the problem into smaller pieces. I think, if you would have to say what is the one skill that software engineers are really good at, it's breaking large problems into smaller ones.
Yeah.
That's the whole idea of software abstraction, right? We take something huge, we try to think about the next level of resolution, and we take up a system and build an architecture out of smaller parts. And then we take a single service or a single component and break it further into other types of hierarchies that make it understandable to us. So just do the same with the problem, and very quickly you'll see that, all right, maybe there are parts that you don't feel comfortable with, but maybe there are a lot of parts that you do, and those can help you kind of gain momentum with this. Another thing I would say that might be a bit more controversial, but there's the old adage that developers hate context switches, both in systems and in their mind. But I actually think that context switches are a blessing. I mean, they're popular in software because that's a great way to do things in parallel, right? But or at least in concurrently. But for us as people, the ability to take your mind off of what you're dealing with is indispensable, right? If I'm struggling with something, what better way do I have to feel better than to do a complete context switch, do something else that I'm not struggling with, and come back? Quick wins, get the dopamine feeling, and keep it going.
Yeah, that's a great point there, because sometimes to get that confidence back, doing that context switch perhaps to a different area where we do have confidence in, and seeing if we can bring that back over into this other context where we're struggling or feeling paralyzed or experiencing that self-doubt can really help us. Not just switching just to avoid it, but actually sometimes we can bring that confidence back in.
It's a momentary switch for you to come back in a different state with a clearer mind, or with more confidence, or with more momentum even.
Yeah. Now, what do you think about this? Do you think it's possible to completely overcome imposter syndrome? What do you think?
Yes, of course. When the land is roaming with unicorns and and fairies are are abundant in tech firms, then people might not have imposter syndrome. But in real life, I don't think we can eliminate it. But I think there's a lot we can do to reduce it. And I mentioned in the beginning that I think imposter syndrome has a lot to do with this gap between your current skills and your ability to learn or to pick up those skills. And that's why I think a lot of what we can do is invest in ourselves, right? When I see that I'm able to pick up new stuff, that gives me confidence to pick up even more new stuff. And a lot of people would recommend software engineers to pick up a new language every year, right? That's something that, and I'm sure you've heard in the past. I think that's great advice, because that builds up your confidence in your ability to pick up new things. And when you look at someone who's doing pretty crazy stuff, you say, hey, maybe I can learn that too. So that's something I think everyone should do. Just keep that muscle going, that big muscle we have in our heads. Keep it going. Always exercise it. And of course, there's a lot we can do on the individual level, but there's also a lot we can do as engineering managers or team leads, or any other management capacity, and that is support the team members. So first of all, understanding that people are going through it. That's a huge part of the problem, right? And sometimes it's hard to spot because people may seem confident on the outside. So understanding when people might encounter imposter syndrome, or when people are actually in it and need a way out, That's, something that good managers should know how to do. But then there are also more structured ways of supporting them. And, obviously very biased here, but I would say that one of the best ways to support people with imposter syndrome is let them own their skills by practicing. And, people practicing both what they're good at, so, they can get those quick wins, but also what they're not good at, so they can see that they can improve, serves, two purposes. It both closes the gap and it gives them confidence at the same time.
Yeah, that's a great point. As you were talking about, like, we've talked about this mostly from the individual level. If I am struggling with imposter syndrome, but imposter syndrome is always within a context of a situation or a team or a project that you're working on. And so how can those other people around us, how can we all support each other? And certainly that a responsibility of a manager or a leader to do that. So you're talking about like being able to recognize that. Any thoughts on some of the ways and tools or experiences that managers can use to recognize and support when they see that someone is struggling with it?
Yeah, so recognizing is definitely more art than science.
Sure.
There are a few things that you can try to pick up on, like if someone is stuck, that's usually a good indication. You called it paralyzed earlier, so if someone is stuck, that might be an indication that they're having imposter syndrome. Also, if someone is trying to offload specific tasks. So if you see someone who whenever they get to do something with databases, are always coming up with a reason why someone else should do it. That's a good indication they might have imposter syndrome, and they think they can't pick up on database skills. They're not good enough. I don't get databases. Everyone else is so good with that, but I don't get it, right? So that's another signal you can pick on. There are a lot of signals, but it really, it all evolves around being very tuned to what your team is doing, and eventually that's what makes people managers good at their job. And that's why being a better developer doesn't necessarily equate to being a better people manager.
Yeah, that's a great point. And just another point there, one of the struggles I see that many managers have in technology situations is really trusting their team sometimes. And we're talking about, hey, someone is actually noticeably struggling with wanting to take on a task. It makes it that much harder perhaps for a manager to give them the support and the confidence and the resources to be able to do that successfully, instead of, because one of the worst things you can do as a leader is take that from them, because you're not letting them grow in that way. But they're recognizing there will be some growing pains there, and so you're trying to balance this short-term win, like what do we need to do now, with the long-term, we have this responsibility to develop and help grow our teams and their capabilities and everything. So it's a tough struggle that managers are dealing with, and imposter syndrome just brings in one more piece to that.
Yeah,
to recognize
definitely. And and if you take away that task from that person, in a way, you're validating their imposter syndrome, right? You've given them a proof point that they are real imposters, even though they aren't. So it's very dangerous to do these types of things. You always need to figure out the ways to support them. One of the ways could be pairing them up with someone who can actually do that. The other is highlighting their prowess or their other virtues in other areas, right? So, if someone is constantly struggling with, like you said earlier, database tasks, you might say, you know what? This is a database task, but actually it has a lot to do with the way this component is designed and the whole data model around it. And that's something I know you're really good at. So I really trust that you'd be able to close that gap. And I'm here to help you with the specific database stuff that you might need. But, just show how it does play to their skills.
Yeah, that's great. This has been such a fun conversation, and really excited, and hope that our listeners are going to take something from this. At this point, we're going to transition into the Take Action Today segment of the show, where we'll get one final piece of actionable advice from On. We'll be right back. Now it's time for our Take Action Today segment of the show. on. We've had a fun discussion around imposter syndrome, how to deal with it, move through it. What's that final piece of advice that you would suggest people to do to help overcome imposter syndrome in their own lives and careers so they can continue to grow and develop as they continue forward?
Yeah, so I would say there's nothing better to deal with imposter syndrome than proving your self-worth to yourself. And one of the ways you can do that is just investing in yourself, improving your skills. You can go and pick an open source project that you like and start contributing to it. You can create a new side project, learn something new, practice your skills, do anything that you can to show yourself how quickly you can pick up stuff. And if there's, one thing that we as engineers are good at is, like I said earlier, breaking problems apart, but also picking up new skills. So that I would say for the individuals. And if you're a manager, make sure that everyone in your team feels the support that they need. Make sure that they know that you've got their backs, and also help them invest in their growth. Obviously I'm very biased, and I like people, like developers specifically, to practice their craft, and specifically with Wilco. But even if it's not a Wilco, help your engineers find ways to invest in themselves and that way feel better.
That's great. Thanks so much for this conversation, and really hope that people are able to take something from this. If people are interested in connecting with you or learning more about Wilco and other things, where would you point them to?
Well, you can go to Wilco on trywilco.com, and you can sign up for free as an individual and just start, practicing. The best way to get a hold of me, I think, is probably Twitter. My handle is onfreund, ONFREUND. If you tag me in a good tweet, there's a good chance I'll answer. But you can also DM me, LinkedIn, anywhere that you want. Just, try to, if you write something nice, I'll probably answer.
Sounds good. Well, so hope that you and Wilco continue to grow and help improve engineers' ability to practice and grow their skills. And so thanks so much for being here, and wish you nothing but the best as you continue forward. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, and I hope I wasn't an imposter, and I actually said interesting things that people found found interesting.
Yeah, great. Take care. I really hope you enjoyed the episode today. We would love to hear your feedback, comments, and questions. You can go to www.engineeringmanagementinstitute.org, where you'll find a summary of the key points discussed in the episode, as well as links to any of the resources, websites, or books that we mentioned. And don't forget to check out any upcoming live webinars, also at engineeringmanagementinstitute.org. Additionally, for any engineers who are struggling and need help taking the next career step, I've created some free training resources with an opportunity to join a more intensive program called the Engineering Career Accelerator. You can find more information at engineeringcareeraccelerator.com. Until next time, I wish you the best in all of your engineering endeavors.